Lifestyle creep. How lifestyle inflation quietly ruins people. Danielle Porter grew up in a yellow brick duplex on the east side of Dayton, Ohio, on a street where everyone's screen doors slammed at the same hour because everyone worked the same kind of jobs. The duplex was technically two homes, but the wall between them was thin enough that she could hear the neighbor's television laughing at things she couldn't see. Money in the Porter house was discussed in whispers, and stress was measured in the soft, terrible sound of overdue bill envelopes sliding through the mail slot and landing on the linoleum in the hall. Her father, Marcus, worked overnight shifts loading freight trucks at a distribution warehouse off I-75. He came home around 6 in the morning with his back stiff and his hands smelling like cardboard and diesel. Her mother, Eileen, cleaned office buildings downtown after hours, vacuuming carpets nobody walked on and emptying trash cans for executives whose names she would never learn. Between them, they worked nearly every day of the week. Yet money still disappeared faster than it arrived, the way water disappears from a cracked glass, slowly, steadily, with no clear villain. Danielle learned early that emergencies were disasters when you were poor. When she was 9, the refrigerator broke, not permanently, just long enough. The compressor whined, then sighed, then went quiet, and because her parents couldn't afford a same-day repair, most of the food inside slid quietly into ruin. She remembered her mother standing in front of the open door at midnight, with one hand pressed to her mouth, the warm yellow bulb still burning bravely above bottles of milk that had already turned. Danielle ate peanut butter sandwiches for almost a week, the cheap kind that left an oily film on the roof of her mouth, while her parents made phone calls in the kitchen with their voices kept low. Everything in the household felt fragile. One missed paycheck could cause panic. One medical bill could become a crisis. One transmission going out on the Buick could threaten her father's job, because if you couldn't get to the warehouse could find someone who could. Her parents loved her ferociously, but stress had a permanent seat at the dinner table, and it ate before anyone else did. Danielle became obsessed with escape. Not luxury, not status, escape. She kept a notebook in the third drawer of her dresser where she wrote down things that adults said about money, phrases she didn't fully understand but suspected were important: compound interest, variable rate, rainy day fund. She underlined the phrase rainy day fund twice because it sounded almost beautiful, like something out of a song. In high school, she studied harder than anyone she knew. She came home from her job at a frozen yogurt shop with the smell of artificial vanilla in her hair, and did calculus at the kitchen table while her mother slept on the couch with her work shoes still on. Mr. Reyes, her junior year guidance counselor, pulled her aside one afternoon in October and told her, in a careful voice, that her grades and test scores could realistically get her into a major university if she went after scholarships seriously. Danielle almost laughed in his face. Nobody in her family went to college. College was something rich kids did in movies and on TV shows about young people whose biggest problems were romantic. But Mr. Reyes kept pushing her, kept printing application forms, kept circling deadlines in red pen. So she applied. And against every expectation she had ever quietly held about herself, she got in, to a state school 3 hours away, on a scholarship that covered most of tuition and almost none of living expenses. The first year was brutal in ways she had not anticipated. It wasn't the coursework. The coursework she could survive. It was the conversations. Other students talked casually about family vacations to Italy, about their parents' investment accounts, about internships their uncles arranged at firms in Manhattan, about graduate school plans they had been workshopping since the 8th grade. Danielle listened to these conversations the way an anthropologist listens to fieldwork, taking quiet notes about a foreign tribe whose customs she would need to learn if she ever wanted to pass for one of them. She worked evenings stocking shelves at a Kroger near campus. Some nights she returned to her dorm at 1 in the morning and woke up again at 5:30 to read before class, her hands still smelling faintly of cardboard the way her father's once had. She cried in private more than once, usually in the third-floor library bathroom, the one with the fluorescent light that flickered and made her face look haunted in the mirror. But she kept going. When she walked across the stage 4 years later with her bachelor's in business administration, her parents sat in the audience holding hands like people witnessing something only barely believable. Her father wore the same dark suit he used for funerals and church, the one that had been mended twice at the elbow. Her mother could not stop smiling. Danielle looked down at them from the stage and felt something fierce and painful expand under her sternum, and she thought with the clean conviction of a young person who has not yet been disappointed by their own life, this changes everything. And for a while, it did. She landed an entry-level analyst role at a logistics company in Chicago, $52,000 a year. To her new coworkers, this was a starter salary, the kind of number you mentioned with a slight apologetic shrug. To Danielle, it felt like a fortune. She rented a studio apartment in Logan Square with unreliable heating and a window that looked directly into the brick wall of the building next door. To celebrate, she bought herself a used espresso machine from Facebook Marketplace for $80 and carried it home on the Blue Line, balanced on her lap like an infant. For the first time in her life, she had breathing room. Not much, but some. She built spreadsheets for everything, savings goals, color-coded by month, retirement projections that ran out to age 67 and made her pulse slow down whenever she looked at them, career timelines with target promotions and target salaries, and the dates by which she wanted to hit them. She kept these spreadsheets the way some people kept journals, as a way of telling herself a story about who she was becoming. Danielle was disciplined then, hungry, focused. She brought homemade lunches to work in the same blue Tupperware she'd had since college: rice, roasted vegetables, chicken thighs marinated on Sundays in soy sauce and brown sugar. She ignored most invitations to expensive happy hours, and when she did go, she nursed a single house red while her coworkers ordered second and third rounds of cocktails with names she had never heard before. Some quietly judged her for it. A senior analyst named Brett once said, in a tone he probably thought was funny, "Porter, you eat the same lunch every day. Are you a robot or just sad?" Danielle laughed because that was easier than not laughing, and went back to her desk and put another $50 into her index fund that night. Within 3 years, she became known internally as someone reliable under pressure. She stayed late without complaining. She solved problems quickly. She learned 3 different software systems faster than anyone else in her cohort, because at night, in her studio with the heating clicking and complaining, she taught herself things her job hadn't required of her yet. Managers noticed, then directors noticed, then a vice president named Lorraine noticed. And one Thursday afternoon, Lorraine asked Danielle to lunch at a place with cloth napkins, and over a salad that cost more than Danielle had ever spent on a single meal. Lorraine offered her a promotion to operations manager. Salary, $78,000. That was the moment something subtle shifted. The promotion came with a kind of visibility she hadn't been prepared for. Meetings with directors. Quarterly leadership offsites at hotels with bathrobes. A standing invitation to Lorraine's monthly dinner, where senior staff drank old fashions and complained about logistics in the affectionate, insider way of people who had decided they would not, in fact, be quitting. Suddenly, Danielle was not sitting beside the junior employees anymore. She was sitting near people who wore watches that cost more than her father's first car, who casually mentioned ski trips to Park City and second properties on Lake Michigan, who said things like, "our place in Door County," with the same offhandedness that her parents used to say, "the kitchen." At first she felt intimidated. Then, more dangerously, she felt embarrassed. Her studio apartment, which had felt like a triumph at 24, began to feel like evidence at 27. Her wardrobe, mostly mid-tier basics from sales racks, suddenly seemed to announce something about her she didn't want announced. Her Honda Civic, which had a small permanent rust bloom near the rear wheel well, looked one way in her old neighborhood, and entirely different in the parking lot of a hotel in River North. Nobody mocked her. That almost made it worse. The pressure was invisible, unspoken, ambient. The pressure of being the only person in a room who hadn't yet learned how to spend money like she'd always had it. Danielle convinced herself she needed to look the part. She told herself this in the same voice she had once used to underline rainy day fund in her childhood notebook. The voice of someone making careful, practical decisions. So she upgraded apartments, a one-bedroom in a high-rise with a doorman who learned her name within a week. Then came nicer furniture, because the IKEA bookshelf looked wrong against the new exposed brick. Then designer work clothes, because appearance mattered in leadership, which was a thing she had heard Lorraine say in passing, and then quoted back to herself a dozen times. Salon appointments every 5 weeks. A luxury gym membership 2 blocks from the office because some executive she was hoping to impress worked out there at 6 in the morning. Each purchase felt reasonable in isolation. That is how lifestyle creep works. It does not arrive through a single catastrophic decision. It arrives disguised as a sequence of perfectly defensible small ones, each of which would survive cross-examination on its own. At first, she still saved money. Just less of it. Then less. Then almost none. She stopped opening the spreadsheet she had once built so lovingly in her studio, because looking at the gap between projection and reality felt like being caught in a lie she was telling herself. But she wasn't worried, because the income kept rising. At 30, she started a part-time MBA program. The company reimbursed tuition partially, contingent on completion. But Danielle financed most of it through loans, because she wanted flexibility, and because the loans, spread over a decade, didn't feel real in the way that her monthly rent felt real. They were a number on a future spreadsheet she would build later. The MBA changed things professionally in the way she had hoped it would. Recruiters started showing up in her LinkedIn inbox with subject lines containing the word opportunity. Her internal trajectory accelerated. By 33, she was a regional operations director. Salary $165,000, plus bonuses that in a good year pushed her past 200. She celebrated by leasing a white luxury SUV with a panoramic sunroof and seats that warmed on 3 settings. The monthly payment was more than her parents' mortgage had once been. She thought about that fact for approximately 11 seconds at the dealership, and then signed the paperwork anyway. By now her social circle had transformed. Most of the people she spent time with worked in corporate management, consulting, finance, or tech. Their lifestyles normalized everything. A $300 dinner became Tuesday. Weekend flights to Nashville or Miami became Wednesday evening decisions made in group chats with a lot of plain emojis. Bottle service at a lounge in River North, ordered at midnight by a coworker named Devin, who never seemed to feel any pain about money, became networking. Nobody called any of it overspending. They called it enjoying life. They called it being in your prime. They called it you only live once, often at a volume that suggested they were trying to convince themselves. And Danielle discovered something dangerous in a way she had not been prepared for. People treated her differently now. Back home in Dayton, relatives bragged about her at cookouts in a way that made her chest ache pleasantly. Online, former classmates from the duplex neighborhood watched her stories, Italian beaches, rooftop bars, a wine tasting in Sonoma, and sent the kind of admiring messages that, when she was 16, she would not have believed she would ever receive. At work, junior employees lowered their voices a little when she walked past. Even strangers, baristas, hosts, drivers, responded to her differently when she dressed a certain way, when she walked into a room a certain way, when she carried herself like someone who expected to be served quickly. It was, she would admit later, intoxicating. Especially for someone who had once stood invisible at a frozen yogurt counter, watching the cool kids order, without acknowledging her. There was a part of Danielle, the 9-year-old part, that was still standing in front of an open refrigerator, full of spoiled food, and that part of her felt, for the first time, full. Beneath the surface, though, the numbers were getting ugly. Her expenses had bloomed in every direction: the high-rise apartment, the leased SUV, student loans, 3 credit cards she rotated like a magician palming aces, dining, travel, clothing, the colorist, the brow person, the trainer, 3 streaming services she didn't use, the financed sectional from a Scandinavian furniture brand, the constant convenience spending that came from being too tired and too busy to do anything the slow way. She told herself she was investing in her image. What she did not let herself say plainly, even in the privacy of her own head, was that her lifestyle now required her exact current salary to survive. Without that income, the entire structure would collapse within a season. The work itself got harder too. Her company entered a period of aggressive expansion and then, almost immediately, restructuring. Targets moved monthly. Headcount conversations became weekly. Employees who had been collegial began competing in small, ungenerous ways for visibility, taking credit a little more eagerly, throwing each other under buses a little more comfortably. Danielle started waking up at 3 a.m, thinking about staffing projections, and a particular client retention spreadsheet that had lately started keeping her up. Her Apple Watch sent her notifications about elevated stress levels. She turned the notifications off. When the exhaustion hit, she spent money to compensate. Too tired to cook? DoorDash. Too stressed? A 4-night flight to Tulum that she could work remotely from. Feeling empty in a way she didn't have language for? a pair of boots, a weekend at a spa in Wisconsin, a handbag in a color she would later describe to a friend as therapy. Every purchase became a small dose of anesthesia. She knew somewhere that this was what was happening. She also knew that knowing it was not the same as stopping. One Friday in September, when she was 35, Danielle attended a corporate event on a rooftop in the West Loop. The skyline was theatrical that night, a clear sky behind the Willis Tower, the sound of a DJ playing tasteful house music at a volume that allowed conversation. Everyone she knew was there, polished and lightly drunk, and laughing in the way people laugh when they've decided to enjoy themselves on purpose. She found herself near the bar with 3 colleagues she had known for years. The conversation somehow slipped sideways. She was never sure later who had cracked first. A senior executive named Greg, who made roughly $300,000 a year, admitted that he hadn't slept properly in months. A woman named Priya, who ran a different region, joked in the careful way people joke about real things, about hiding a credit card balance from her husband. And Lorraine herself, the same Lorraine who had once promoted Danielle over salad with cloth napkins, said very quietly that she was terrified of the next round of layoffs, because despite everything, she had almost no liquid savings. "None of us can stop," Lorraine said. She was looking out at the skyline, not at any of them. "We just keep needing more of what we have." Danielle laughed along with them, because that was what the moment seemed to require. But later that night, alone in her apartment with her shoes off and the city humming 12 floors below, she opened her banking app and made herself really look at her accounts. She made nearly $190,000 a year. Her actual liquid savings after everything would not cover 3 months of her current life. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. The realization felt physical, like bending down too fast. But instead of changing direction that night, she did what she had always done. "I'm still young. I'm investing in myself. My income will keep increasing. I deserve this after everything I survived growing up." She set the phone face down on the marble countertop and went to bed. The economy slowed in February. Clients renegotiated. Corporate spending tightened. Rumors of a restructuring spread the way rumors do in companies, first as a joke at lunch, then as a serious sentence in a one-on-one, then as an email from someone in HR with a subject line that was carefully neutral. Danielle tried not to panic. Upper management always believed layoffs targeted the lower levels first. That was the comforting story, told in the voices of the people most invested in believing it. Until one Tuesday morning in March, when her calendar updated itself with a new meeting she had not put there. Organizational discussion. 9:30 a.m., conference room 4B. Attendees: Danielle Porter, Marcus Webb, HR, Lorraine Aiden. Her stomach dropped before she'd finished reading the second name. When she walked into the conference room, the HR partner was already seated beside Lorraine, with a folder placed precisely in front of him. Lorraine would not meet her eyes for the first 3 seconds, and that, more than anything, told Danielle what was coming. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Her role was being eliminated as part of a regional realignment. Severance would be provided. 6 months, given her tenure. Benefits would expire in 60 days. There was a packet and a number she could call, and a sentence about how this decision did not reflect her performance. Danielle nodded mechanically. She heard but did not entirely process the careful, lawyered language. Lorraine, near the end, said, "I'm so sorry, Danielle." And Danielle could see, to her surprise, that Lorraine actually was. Walking out of the building felt surreal. The loop looked exactly the same. The same hot dog cart on the corner. The same man in a scarf, trying to hand her a flyer for a comedy show. But her entire future had quietly tilted. At first, she remained confident. She had experience, education, executive credentials. She updated her resume in a single afternoon, and assumed another opportunity would surface within a month, 2 at most. But the market had changed. There were 200 applicants for every senior operations role she qualified for, many of them ex-colleagues from her industry who had been laid off in the same wave. Recruiters who had once chased her now took 6 business days to respond, then 5 business days, then never. Interviews advanced 2 rounds, then ghosted. One company brought her to the final round, and then on a Thursday afternoon, decided to pause hiring until Q3. Weeks became months. Her severance shrank fast. because severance shrinks in proportion to the lifestyle it has to support. The SUV payment alone was almost $1,000 a month. The apartment was $3,200. Insurance, subscriptions, the gym she no longer used, the storage unit she had forgotten about, the financed couch she still owed 11 months on. When she finally sat down and made the spreadsheet she had been avoiding, she discovered that she had been bleeding nearly $9,000 a month before she even bought groceries. The credit cards filled. Then she began rolling balances between them, opening a new card with a 0% introductory rate, transferring, opening another. She knew intellectually that this was how people drowned slowly. She did it anyway, because the alternative, calling her father in Dayton to ask for help, was unthinkable. She stopped opening certain emails. She stopped looking at her bank app on the train. She started waking at 4 a.m. with her heart already running. One Saturday in June, in the bright, humming brightness of a Trader Joe's near her apartment, her debit card declined. She had bananas, oat milk, frozen dumplings, a bouquet of yellow tulips. The total was $41.12. The cashier, a young man with a beard and a name tag that said Ezra, looked up at her with the practiced gentleness of someone who had been trained for this exact moment. "Would you like to try another card?" he said. She said, "Yes, of course," in a voice that did not sound like her own. Her hands shook as she pulled a credit card from her wallet. That one declined too. So did the next. Behind her, a man with a child in a cart was waiting, very politely, not looking at her. She left without the groceries. She walked the 4 blocks to her apartment without seeing them. She had once approved 7-figure operational budgets. $41.12 had refused her at a grocery store. That night she cried harder than she had since she was 12. Not because of the money, although the money was terrible, because she suddenly saw, clearly, all at once, the way you sometimes see the shape of a room after a flash of lightning, how fragile her life had been all along. Everything she had built depended on the income continuing. Nothing she had built was designed to last. Over the following months, Danielle dismantled her life piece by piece. She did it methodically, the way she had once built her spreadsheets in the studio in Logan Square, with a kind of grim, clarifying focus. She broke the SUV lease at a punishing penalty and sold her way out of it. She gave notice on the high-rise apartment and moved into a 1-bedroom in Albany Park, on the 3rd floor of a walk-up, where the radiators clanked and the kitchen was the size of a closet. The radiators sounded, she realized her first night there, exactly like the radiators in the duplex in Dayton. She listed designer handbags on a resale site for fractions of what she had paid for them, and learned the particular humiliation of watching a bag she had bought to feel powerful sell to a stranger in Atlanta for $200. She canceled subscriptions she had forgotten she had. She closed the gym membership. She stopped trying to maintain appearances, stopped getting the highlights, stopped buying the work-appropriate dresses, stopped pretending, when running into former colleagues, that everything was fine. Each decision bruised her pride in a specific way, but underneath the bruising, something else began to surface. Something she had not expected: clarity. For years she had confused consumption with success. She had thought financial progress meant upgrading the surface of her life, the apartment, the car, the wardrobe, the restaurants. But the upgrades had not produced security. They had produced dependency. They had built a structure that required her exact paycheck, every 2 weeks, forever. And that structure had never been a fortress. It had been a stage set. In late July, she drove the cheap used Corolla she had bought back to Dayton for the first time in over a year. Her parents' duplex looked smaller than it ever had. The yellow brick had darkened slightly with weather. The porch railing wobbled when she leaned on it. Her father, now 63, moved more slowly than she remembered, although his shoulders were still wide from 40 years of lifting things he should not have lifted. After dinner, pork chops, green beans, mashed potatoes, the same meal he had been making her since she was 7. Marcus came out to the porch with 2 cans of cheap beer and handed her one without asking. The cicadas were doing their long electric whine in the trees. The streetlight at the end of the block was the same streetlight she had walked under in middle school. They sat there for a while without talking. He let her sit. That was something she had forgotten about him, that he could let his silence be long without needing to fix it. "You okay?" he finally said. She had a speech prepared. She had rehearsed parts of it on the drive down. She had sentences about market conditions and severance packages and reasonable explanations. What came out instead was, "I think I built a life I couldn't actually afford." He nodded slowly. He took a sip of his beer. "You know," he said, "when I was younger, I used to think rich people didn't worry about money." She laughed, a small wet laugh. "So did I." He looked out toward the street for a long moment, the way he used to look out at the street when she was a child, and he was thinking about something he didn't plan to say. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Maybe everybody's scared," he said. "Just different kinds of scared." She did not answer. She didn't need to. The cicadas filled the silence the way they always had. And she sat next to her father on a porch that needed paint, drinking a beer that cost $1, and felt for the first time in years like she was sitting still. She accepted an operations role at a mid-size manufacturing company in suburban Chicago that fall. The salary was $112,000, $60,000 below her peak. The old version of herself, the version who had leased the SUV without flinching, would have considered the position a humiliation. The new version of herself considered it a boat. This time she did things differently. She built an emergency fund first. Not after a vacation, not after upgrading anything. First. She set a target of 6 months of expenses, and did not let herself spend on anything non-essential until she hit it. It took 14 months. The day she hit it, she sat on the couch in her one-bedroom and cried, quietly, for reasons she could not entirely articulate. She attacked the credit card debt next, methodically, smallest balance first, because she needed the morale of small wins. She paid off the financed couch. She paid off the loans she had taken to top up her MBA. She read books, actual books, not blog posts, about index funds and tax-advantaged accounts, and the specific undramatic mathematics of long-term investing. She automated her contributions so that the money disappeared from her checking account before she could feel it leave. Most importantly, and this was the part that took the longest, longer than any of the math, she stopped using spending as proof of self-worth. That was hard. Some weeks it was very hard. There were still afternoons when an old colleague posted something from a beach in Greece, and Danielle felt, distinctly, the old itch to prove she was still in the game. There were stressful Thursdays when the phrase "I deserve this" rose up in her like a reflex, and she had to talk herself down from a purchase the way you talk yourself out of texting an ex. She got better at noticing the trigger before it became a transaction. She got better at sitting with the discomfort of not buying and discovering that it passed, usually within an hour, almost always before the next morning. Years passed, the way they do when you are no longer panicking through them. At 39, Danielle owned a modest 2-bedroom condo in a neighborhood she actually liked. She drove a 4-year-old Honda CR-V with a small dent in the passenger door from a parking garage incident she still found funny. Her income was lower than during her peak corporate years, but her financial life was, by every measure that mattered, infinitely stronger. She had no credit card debt. She had retirement investments that had been compounding, untouched for 6 years. She had cash reserves equal to a year of expenses. She had a fully funded emergency account she had not had to dip into. She had, for the first time since she was 9 years old, standing in front of a broken refrigerator, the ability to absorb a shock without it becoming a catastrophe. For the first time in her life, money no longer ran her emotional weather. One Saturday morning in October, Danielle sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a small dish of cut apple, reviewing her brokerage account in the unhurried way of someone for whom the numbers had stopped being threats. Sunlight came in through the east window in long, pale bars. The apartment was very quiet. There were no collection calls. There was no fear of overdrafts. There was no schedule of impressing anyone. There was just a Saturday, and the strange thing, the thing she had not expected, even after all of it, was that the peace felt richer than any of the luxury she had once chased. Not metaphorically richer, actually richer, in some way she could feel in her chest. Years earlier she had thought wealth meant visible success, the kind that registered on other people's faces when she walked into a room. Now she understood, in her body and not just in her head, that real wealth was something quieter. It was time. Flexibility, security, low ambient stress, the freedom to make decisions without fear running her face. She started mentoring younger employees, mostly women, mostly first-generation professionals, mostly the ones who reminded her of herself at 24. Whenever one of them got a meaningful promotion, Danielle invited them to coffee. Actual coffee, in a small ceramic cup, not anything more performative, and told them the same thing. Your income can grow faster than your wisdom, if you're not careful. Most of them smiled politely. Some of them, she could tell, filed the sentence away under things older people say, and went off to lease a car. A few of them listened, really listened, the way she wished she had listened to anyone, ever. One of those was a young analyst named Theo, who had grown up in a trailer park in West Virginia and had just been promoted to manager. After their second coffee, he texted her a year later to say that he had almost financed a luxury car after his promotion and had pulled back at the last minute because of something she said. She read the text on her balcony in the evening, and she allowed herself a small, quiet moment of satisfaction. She knew firsthand how quietly the trap began. Not through greed, usually. Through insecurity. Through comparison. Through finally, wanting to feel safe after a childhood without stability, and mistaking the costume of safety for the thing itself. Lifestyle creep does not, as a rule, feel reckless while it is happening. It feels earned, reasonable, temporary. It feels like proof, finally, that you have made it. Until one Tuesday morning a meeting appears on your calendar that you did not put there, and the entire performance ends in less time than a lunch break. Danielle eventually learned something no university had ever taught her. A high income can make you look wealthy. Only discipline can make you wealthy. And the difference between the two, between looking and being, is the difference between a stage set and a house. She had spent 15 years confusing them. She did not plan to confuse them again.